today.
Yeah, happy. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, let's get started here in a second. Colette, are we people coming in, or Mackenzie, are we getting some people in the door?
We are. People are spooling in now.
Okay.
About 40 people already logged on and counting.
So maybe just another 30 seconds or so. How's that?
That sounds good.
Paul, what kind of weather are you all having out there this morning?
It's pretty nice. I think on the Palouse we're going to be in about maybe low 60s, but looks pretty decent today. And spring is finally starting to show. So.
I think we could go ahead and get started, Paul.
Right. Thank you, Colette. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 2022 spring meeting of the Inland Northwest Partners. And I promise to you here and now, this will be the last virtual meeting we will have. We will be back in person because we all know and appreciate the value of that connectivity, being together, sharing our challenges and our successes. And I know how important that is to all of you. So again, I think we're done with this. I hope we're done with it. So welcome everybody. My name is Paul Kimmel. I am the board chairman of the Inland Northwest Partners and a regional business manager with Avista Corporation. I'd like to welcome you to our spring webinar. It's titled Civic Apathy and Civic Pride. We're looking forward to hearing from our presenter, Jeff Siegler, in a few minutes. And again, just a little information, this will be posted. The presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the Inland Northwest Partner website, inwp.org, under the resource tab. So it's important for you to know that without the support of our investors, sponsors, and members, our work would not be possible, and we want to recognize them again here this morning. If you would pull up that next slide, Mackenzie. We have our founding investor, Avista Corporation, our major investors, Alaska Airlines, the City of Post Falls, the Kohl's Company, and our newest major investor, and we want to give them a great shout out, Idaho Central Credit Union. Thank you so much for joining us today. Spokane International Airport, the Idaho Department of Commerce, Washington State Department of Commerce, and our contributing investors, Bank of America, WSU Extension, Garco Construction, the Nez Perce Tribal Enterprises, TD&H, the Spokesman Review, and Washington Trust Bank. And if you want to find out more about being an investor, again, please go to our website for that. We would love to have you supporting the great work that we do. I also want to extend a great thank you to University of Idaho Extension for hosting us this morning. Again, their assistance in the technology and delivery of this webinar is always top notch. We want to really appreciate Colette DePhelps as well as Mackenzie Lawrence for that work. So I will hand it over to you, Colette.
Great. Welcome, everyone. I think everyone is probably a Zoom pro by now, but here's a couple of tips in case you run into any challenges. We do encourage you to close all of the other programs running on your computer so you can dedicate your bandwidth to this webinar. If you have any problems with your sound, you can switch to the phone. There is a call-in number provided in your welcome email. If you do that, you definitely want to go down to the microphone in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and tell your computer that you are switching to phone so you don't get feedback. please type questions into the Q&A box, which you'll find in that control bar, generally located at the bottom of your screen. We also have a chat box, and the chat box we're reserving for technical help and talking with each other. So if you do have questions for our speaker today, please put those in the Q&A box. We will have about a half an hour at the end of today's program where Paul will facilitate that Q&A session. If you have any technological issues, please put those in the chat and Mackenzie and I will help. And also thanks to everyone who is introducing themselves in the chat. Please feel free to continue your conversation there. So I'll hand it back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Colette, very much. And again, thanks, Mackenzie and Colette. That's great support. We do appreciate U of I Extension in so many ways. You guys are really the glue that holds much of the state together in so many ways. Before I introduce our keynote, I wanted to give a shout out and introduce you all to our new Inland Northwest Partner Executive Director, Katie Gelke. Katie, there she is. Katie took over for the long-serving Sharon Matthews in January, and we are so pleased to have Katie joining us to carry on the great work that Sharon did for so many years, 25 plus years. Katie's background is marketing and media and communications, and she currently works also with the Washington Beef Commission. She is a former local government mayor in Fairfield, Washington, and she resides there. So some of you may see mailings now that are coming out of Fairfield, Washington for INP. So just know those are coming out of Katie's hometown. And so it's good to have Katie, and welcome Katie aboard here. So again, hopefully you've all communicated with her in one form or another. So thank you. Okay. Let's see, hopefully everybody's technology is working. So let's get moving. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Jeff Siegler. He grew up in a struggling Rust Belt city and understands the devastating cost of civic apathy. After obtaining his master's degree in urban planning from Virginia Commonwealth, he went to work on Main Street, first as a downtown manager and business improvement district director, and later as the Ohio Main Street state coordinator. Now a consultant, Jeff travels nationally and internationally to assist communities in their efforts to restore civic health. He places the focus on making our towns into places residents can be proud of to call home, rather than on economic development and tourism. Siegler founded the Civic Pride consulting firm, Revitalize or Die. Hopefully many of you have been out on his site. He does a great blog with lots of good insight and perspective. And he's a co-founding partner of a organization called Proud Places. He's currently in the process of, well, I think he's finished writing the book, and now he's in the process of finding a publisher for his book, which is titled Your City is Sick. So following Jeff's formal comments, we're going to have a Q&A afterwards. And again, as Colette mentioned, there is a Q&A box for those. So we'll be watching for those, and I will pose those to Jeff. So please help me welcome Jeff Siegler.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and thanks everybody for having me. It is coming to you this morning from cold and dreary Pittsburgh. And, you know, when it comes to these presentations, I tend to tinker. And I'm always kind of messing with this one. And I woke up this morning with this sort of epiphany that, oh my God, I have to change the whole thing. And so I ripped it apart this morning and had to rebuild it, which was a really bad idea. So so it might be a little clunky because I completely mess with it. But on the other hand, I think the information is much better. So with that, I'm going to see if I can share the screen and see if we can't possibly jump into this thing. All right. Are we good, everybody?
Looks great.
All right, perfect. All right, then here we go. I will speak into the void for the next hour and a half. All right. So appreciate the warm welcome, and it's great to have a chance to speak with you all this morning. As Paul mentioned, you know, I grew up in a struggling Rust Belt town in Northwest Ohio, kind of between Dayton and Toledo. When I graduated moved, went to school down, remained in Ohio and studied economics and behavioral economics, which ended up having a lot more influence on my thinking than I expected, and has really come in handy as we think about some of the decisions we make and maybe some of the myths on Main Street and how we approach some of this work that a lot has to do relates back to behavioral economics and rational thinking. Later, spent some time working out in Montana. Worked while I was working on a ranch in the Yellowstone Valley. Was fortunate circumstance to find myself in. I ended up doing some volunteer work for the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. And that was the first clue I had into this whole idea of land use and how, as that particularly special piece of land was shifting hands from locals to a handful of wealthy people that were from out of the state. The valley was really changing, and again, I only saw a glimpse of it, but locals told me how much it was changing and what an impact it was have, and how there was less and less of that special place to share and less access to the river, and how it was really changing the valley. So it really got me thinking about land use, and which then brought me to this whole idea of city planning and how we think about space. And we obsess a lot about the inside of our homes, and there's plenty of renovation shows, and there's magazines, and there's everything to do with how you think about the inside of your home, but we give very little thought to the outside of our home and our home outside of our four walls, and how we deal with space and place and the places we move around, and streets and cities. And so it sparked this sort of lifelong passion to think about the places we live and how we shape them, and how we're probably not doing a great job. And so studied urban planning at Virginia Commonwealth University, and took a position as a Main Street manager in Lancaster, Ohio. Did that for a couple of years, and it was great. It was pretty fascinating, and it taught me something. And I'll probably jump back to this later, but when it comes to place, we have relationships, and just like any relationship, there's healthy ones, there's unhealthy ones, there's average ones, there's great ones, there's toxic relationships. And my first relationship with the community was not a healthy one. Lima turned out not to be a healthy town for me. And so as with any relationship, you can either acquiesce, you can either come to accept it and let it shape you or change who you are. But the second town I'd lived in for a long time was Lancaster, and it had its flaws, and I worked to change it. As the downtown manager and a passionate citizen, I worked very hard to try to change that place, to make that a healthier relationship, and see if we couldn't be more compatible. And did that for 2 years as the downtown manager, later for another 8, just living in town. And later I moved. And kind of found myself in a relationship that with a community that was already pretty healthy. So I think it's important to kind of remember that we're all in a relationship with our community, and you have a choice. You can stay and accept. You can try work hard to change, or people leave. But that's sort of that rational behavior, and it's something we need to keep in mind if we're trying to think about how we want to retain our best and brightest or attract new people. We've got to think about, is that relationship between our community and its resident a healthy one? So so I was working as after I left the position, I accepted a position as the state Main Street coordinator in Ohio. And what that meant was I traveled around to dozens of communities. We worked formally with dozens of communities, probably visited hundreds of communities during that time, who are all trying to figure it out, who are all trying to understand like what needs to be done. How do we revitalize? How do we get healthy again? Something's wrong, something's broken in our community, nothing's working. What do we do? And there were certain towns that I visited a lot. It seems like I would go back every year and run into the same problems, which was really disheartening, because the year before you thought maybe you turned a corner. it would be a meeting with the mayor or council or chamber or whoever it was, and you'd sit down and you try to talk through these things, and it was like, no, it's, let's say it's a vacancy issue, guys. We've got to deal with these vacancies. Let's say it's an entrepreneurial issue. Let's say it's a money issue, and here's where you can find funding, or organizational issue. And you would think that I always thought like, oh, we made progress this time. It's gonna get better. This was it. And return a year later, and it's like, oh God, everything's still terrible. Nobody gets along. Nothing's moved. Maybe it's even gotten worse. And it finally dawned on me that the issue that we were addressing was really different. We were trying to fix a technical issue, and it wasn't a technical problem. Certainly there were technical problems, but what was happening, what dawned on me is like the actual issue was apathy. That what was wrong in these communities was really something more basic, something more human, and it was apathy. And kind of what helped bring this about is, if you can see that map of Ohio out there, over along the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, that's the Ohio River, and there's a bunch of really rough and struggling towns in that area, East Liverpool, Ohio, Steubenville. Some pretty difficult places. And as I was leaving the office one morning to head out to East Liverpool, my coworker said, oh, have a good time over in the Depression Belt. And it was kind of got a giggle at the time, but it really sat with me. And I was like, oh God, that's right. Like, that is the Depression Belt. It kind of sucks to go work there. It's hard. It beats you down. It's depressing. And it's not just the environment. It's like the people too. And I, like, I want to be careful. Like, they're all trying to do their best, but it's like, there's something about working there that even, it got really rough in dealing with people that always looked at everything from a negative perspective. This won't work here. It can't happen here. There was always these things in their way. There was always some reason why it wouldn't work for them. And it really like, oh, and so it dawned on me like, that's how apathy behaves, is putting your own sort of roadblocks up and coming up with reasons why you can't achieve something. You end up kind of being in your own way. And so it realized like, that's why what we're trying to do isn't working. Because we are always thinking about this problem as, well, what are the technical solutions? Can we throw money at it? Will a plan work? It's like, oh, well, if your buildings are empty, you need to fill up your buildings, and you need some vacant property legislation. Or if the streets were too wide, like, you need to narrow your street, or whatever it is. Like, obviously, as I always come back to, like, we really know what to do when it comes to revitalization. We can look at cities that are successful and healthy. We can look at our own cities and communities 100 years ago and see maybe how they operated differently. We can look to, like, there are plenty of examples of what to do. So it's not the issue of what needs to be done. It was the fact that nobody ever could do it. I was in a meeting in Houma, Louisiana 2 weeks ago, and they were complaining about, downtown's not safe for pedestrians. Like, there's too many cars. And I'd asked, oh, there's 70 people in the room, and the 70 people that probably ran the town, these were probably some of the most influential people. And I asked her, show of hands, how many of you think pedestrians should be prioritized? 70 people raised their hands. It's like, this is crazy that all 70 of you agree on something, and it can't happen. Like, so it's not an issue of not knowing what to do. It's not even an issue of not agreeing on what to do. There's something else going on that's keeping it from happening. I have this talk with my son a lot, who's getting into football, and it's like, hey, you're going to have to work out. You need to be in better shape for when your season starts. And he never does. And it's like, oh, we know how to get in shape. Like, he knows that you need to eat less and work out more to get in shape. That's not the problem. The problem lies somewhere in between aspiration and action. There's a different issue at heart, which is not doing it. of simply not being able to find the motivation, not being able to make the decision. Something else is going on in our communities where we can provide them with all the direction. We can give them all these things that we can give them all the technical assistance we need. But if there's no follow through, if they can't pull it off, it's not going to get any better. And I think what I'm starting to realize too is all these studies and plans, I think, are even making the apathy worse. Because imagine somebody keeps telling you, hey, here's what you need to do. Or imagine that you just spent all your money on a personal fitness plan and you didn't get any better. Like it almost erodes your self-esteem more when you keep telling like, hey, we know what to do, or we've told you what to do, or here's the plan and you can't pull it off. So this got me thinking though about this intersection between city and people and this idea of like, hey, you're going to the depression belt. And I started to realize that cities take on the characteristics of their residents, that there's a reason why a community has a personality, be it, Green Bay or Williamsburg, Brooklyn, or East Liverpool, Ohio. A city takes on the characteristics of its residents, and that makes sense. That's why cities do have character. That's why they kind of, that's why you go to some places and they feel different. Like, Houma, Louisiana feels entirely different from Pittsburgh. And that's why it's kind of fun to go to, but it feels different because all the people there are different and their communities take on that character. And so when we think about how to treat, how to fix these issues with cities, what we can do is start to think about how do we fix these issues with people? What lessons do we know about people? And that should be our guide. And I think that that's why we have such a hard time. It's like, well, cities are this crazy thing that we don't understand. So, money or grants or planning, or we're not sure what's wrong, but it's, but here's what we've understood is here's what we keep trying, instead of looking at them as a collection of humans and trying to apply some of those lessons. And so I think when people grow apathetic, which has happened, we've all either experienced in our own lives or had somebody else, it's kind of a sickness. Apathy is simply the lack of care or concern. And when you don't care about something, like that's bad. Like when you lose care and concern in your life, like that's what attaches us to this world. Like that's the sign of good health. That that ensures that we probably are doing well and behaving in a healthy manner. Like our attachment to other people, our care and concern for what's in our lives, for our relationships, for our our home, whatever it is. Like being apathetic is a sign of something going wrong, and it's a sign of a concerning sign about a person's health when they start not to care anymore. And that's when things start to slide. Like when we don't care about something, again, that could be our physical health, that could be our home, it could be our favorite bike, it could be our community and our relationships. When we stop caring, that's when the things start to decline. And that's when, and as soon as anything, I think it's important to remember, as soon as you stop tending to something, you've got to there's a collision course that you're on. Like as soon as let's say you stop taking care of your own health or your home, that it starts to decline. Like that's the nature of chaos in nature itself, is that, it moves towards disorder. And when you stop caring for your yard, like it's going to get overgrown. When you stop working out, you're going to start to get in worse shape. When you stop, let's say, calling your mom, like those tensions are going to start to build. And eventually it's going to come to a head where you either have to walk away. Sadly, like it's too far damaged. A building gets in such bad shape that it has to be torn down. We've all seen that. Or you have to do a ton of work to fix it up. And that becomes stressful. It becomes stressful. It becomes overwhelming when you don't get to the laundry or when you don't mow the grass. It becomes overwhelming when your city starts to decline so much. So it creates a real problem when we stop maintaining things that creates a lot of stress in our lives, and it just builds. So coming back to this idea of how our cities, it is apathy that happens, and it's apathy that's happened in our cities. A bunch of people stop caring collectively about the place that they've been, about the place where they live. And what apathy does then is a bunch of people stop caring about the place that they call home. And then there's this overwhelming problem of what do we do about it, of how do we start to fix this? But again, it's all individuals. And so we can think about this problem in our cities the same way that we think about individuals. And again, it's why studies, never work. It's an emotional problem. It's a self-esteem issue. It's about care and concern. It's not about these technical answers that we always try to provide. It's far more about how do we get people to care again? And that's a very different set of problems. So I see like all this work that we've been doing over this long stretch of time that hasn't really helped our cities much. I think it's because we're approaching the wrong problem. We're looking at it from a technical perspective of, yes, you have to do X, Y, and Z. But if you can't get out of bed in the morning, knowing how to run a marathon isn't that helpful. If you can't get out of your way, if you can't get people to get along, if politics are so bad, if people don't care, if they don't feel an attachment to their community, if they don't feel love for their community, telling them what needs to be done doesn't really matter. We have to do something far more simple. We have to do something far more basic, which is to help rekindle that sense of pride, care, concern, and attachment for a community. I was working in Massillon, Ohio, and we were I was helping out a planning firm do a downtown plan. And as we were doing kind of the public input portion, people were saying like, well, what do you love most about Massillon? It's like, oh, we're proud. And what's the greatest strength? Well, we're proud. And whatever it was that came up, it's like, we're proud. We're probably the proudest people in the whole wide world. We are the capital of pride. Look it up. Like, we're in the Guinness Book of World Records for being proud. And it's like, okay, I get it. Like, you're certainly proud. That's wonderful. And it got me a lot. So they kept coming back to us like, okay, that's a really great aspect of this community. And then so later we were doing a little tour around town, went for a little walk, and it really stuck with me how much they focused on pride, and I couldn't find it. And it's like, where are you hiding this thing? What are you talking about? And it was trying to understand. Then they said that they were so proud. What does it mean? And where do they get that? And kind of like, pride is something that's typically on display. And again, I trust that they were being sincere, but I didn't understand where they derived that sense from. What was making them feel that they were so proud? Is it was something that they believed they needed to say? And then how does pride act? How does pride manifest itself? How do we take care of things that we're proud of? And because you can't just say it. And so I didn't see it. What I did see, sadly, was that they were really proud of their high school football team. They were obsessed with high school football. And that's kind of not the same thing as being proud of your community. And I think that they conflated the two, that they were really proud of their high school team. And I thought that made them proud of their community, which, yeah, like I said, isn't the same. And it's not ideal, but what it did tell me, I think what it helped show me is that when a community and when a person is looking for a place to invest their pride, I think we all need something to invest our pride in, because it's a part of our self-esteem. It's a part of our own well-being. And they didn't have any place to invest their pride in their community. It was rundown houses. It was ugly streets. It was wide streets. It was empty buildings. It was busted up signage that had been left from the last political campaign. It was broken windows. It was all the things that aren't pride were on display. And so they were taking their pride and investing it in their team and putting all of their hopes and dreams and all their faith and all their pride in a bunch of 18-year-old boys that plays football on Friday night. And that's probably not a healthy thing. I mean, I enjoy watching my football too, but like, that's not the healthiest place to put it. And that's not that we should aspire to do better. And what I've noticed since then, and you all probably see it, it's like, I think where people are more obsessed about, high school football or whatever it is, oftentimes seems to have a negative relationship or a direct correlation to the health and condition of the community. I always remember when I was living in Richmond and there was a fight about keeping the AAA baseball team, that a friend from Montreal said, we would never fight to keep a sports team. We have other things going on. We're a very cultural, cool city, and like sports doesn't define us. So it kind of helped shape that thinking. And so what it did, as I thought more and more about this concept of pride and what it means, I realized that it's the antithesis of apathy. Apathy is simply not caring about something, not having concern. Pride is having a great deal of care and concern for something. And when you're proud of something, you care a lot about it. Whether that's your children, whether that's your town, whether that's your new car, whether that's your garden or your sports team, whatever it is. When we have pride in something, we tend to it, we care for it, we take care of it, we share it. You all know what it's like to have something you're proud of in your life, and how you treat it and how that pride manifests itself. And so really, like, there's this sort of spectrum, continuum, and apathy on one side and pride on the other. And what we in essence need to start doing is think about how we move communities from one side of that spectrum to the other. And so I think it comes back to this idea of, like, we've been misdiagnosing the problem the whole time. We've been trying to treat these technical aspects instead of trying to treat this more base problem, which is communities are suffering from apathy because of a lack of pride. And so I think we have to consider how we go about healing our cities. And most importantly, this is why I think economic development and tourism haven't necessarily worked. Like, yes, that's trying to fix the issue in a more technical aspect, but it's not getting at this internal idea of apathy and a lack of self-esteem. And so what it made me realize is, like, we got into a ditch. We drove into a ditch and we can't get out of it the same way we got into it. We have to rethink how we approach our communities. The more I looked at it, the more I realized, like, we have to treat some of this stuff like we're dealing with mental health issues or with physical health issues. And we can really learn lessons. Like, we can learn lessons from the healthcare industry and the wellness industry about how we go about helping people and apply those same things to our cities. Because really, a city full of a struggling community is likely a community full of struggling individuals. And if we start to apply that logic, I think that we can find that we can start to make more progress. We can fix that more internal stuff so that we have a chance to fix the external. And so, in what brings about apathy, what brings about a lack of self-esteem, usually something occurs, usually something happens. Something changed in your life that brought you down. It could be job loss. It could be breaking up with a partner. Maybe it's, maybe it is somebody got in bad shape, like a binge eater, or maybe you had an injury and you couldn't stay in the same physical shape as before. Maybe your income went down. Maybe there was some sort of trauma. Maybe you feel isolated. Maybe there's addiction issues. Like, whatever it is, in an individual's life, something occurs, something happens to sort of bring them down, to change their outlook, to change how much they care, how much their own self-esteem. And it doesn't matter what that is. We've all dealt with something that was a blow to our image and had us caring less. But when we think about like that, it doesn't matter how it happened. In any case, something happened and it caused people to end up being in a place maybe that's not their best self, where they're struggling. And I think that that's what happened to our cities. And so I want to tell a little story of what I think happened to our towns and why we're in the situation we are. So this is the town that I am from. This is not the place I grew up. Like, this is the town has the same name and it sits on the same physical patch of grass. But this is not the Lima I grew up in. This was my grandparents' Lima, and I wish I could have seen it. I hear stories, I see pictures, but I never had the chance to see a community like this. But I think that it was probably a place that was wildly proud, that was probably pretty incredible to live. And I think about what went into that and how pride and wellness and health manifests itself in cities. And one of those areas is effort. One of the things that we're proud of is effort. And this was called the Black Swamp, the Great Black Swamp region. And for whatever insane reason, a group of people decided, they got to the Great Black Swamp and like, hey, this is awesome. Let's build a town here. Let's drain the swamp and make a city. And so a ton of effort went into taking a swamp and turning it into a community. And effort makes us proud. Like, I love working in the backyard. Like, I really like putting in effort. I like, whether it's going to the gym, like hard work is immensely satisfying. Putting in effort and using your own gifts, whether that's your skill at work, your mental skills to, solving a crossword, or whether that's using your muscles or whatever it is. But when we exert effort and energy, I think it makes us feel good. It's healthy. I mean, it's really good for your body, but it also is rewarding. So in this town, they exerted a ton of effort, which made them very proud. They also did something that I think that we've lost. Like, they progressed. They got better. They were constantly moving forward. They went from a swamp to probably little wood cabins to, let's say 2-story brick structures to 5-story stone structures. They went to dirt roads, having paved roads. They went from nothing to a city. They progressed. And how great that must feel to get better. We all feel better. We're all proud of progress, whether it's in work, whether it's in parenting, whether it's in sports. Like, anytime we get better at something, we feel better about ourselves. And that's why it's really important that we all have those areas in our life that we can improve upon, because that builds our mental health, that improves our self-esteem. And boy, they must have had a ton of it. And that jumps back to that idea. It's like, yeah, when somebody tells you, here's the plan to get better, here's this $200,000 study how to get better, and then nothing happens, and we've got another study sitting on the shelf. Like, it just points out that once again, you didn't progress. I had a rental car yesterday in Omaha, Nebraska, and I did not wash it before I turned it in because I didn't own it. Nobody takes care of a rental car. Ownership has a lot to do with pride and how we feel about something. And when we have an ownership stake in something, it is a reflection on us. It's a part of us. We take better care of something that we own, because we understand that it's linked to our ego. And our communities used to have real ownership. Like, the people that lived in a town used to own the town. They used to own all the real estate. They used to own all the commerce. They used to run everything. They used to have, it used to be theirs. Somebody would build a building and put their name on top because they were so proud of their relationship to it. And how much that changes to have that strong sense of ownership. And there's also a collective community ownership that I don't think that sometimes we pay enough attention to. Like, I'm proud of things in my community that I don't necessarily own, but that the community own. Like, if a new Applebee's opens up, I am not going to brag about it and share it on social media. Or if a friend comes to town, I'm not going to say, hey, you got to see the shit that we got, man. It's a new Applebee's. You're never gonna believe it. But a local bakery opened up last year, and I'm so proud of it. Like, I didn't own it. I didn't do anything, but there is this new cool business in my community, and I feel a sense of ownership of it because it is of my community. So we can be proud of things in our community if they're locally owned. Our cities used to have this, oh my God, they were gorgeous. They were beautiful. They were built with pride. Like, I saw something recently where somebody was describing how city leaders thought about cities during the Renaissance, and how the Medici thought about Florence, and why it was so important to them that it be beautiful, They actually they looked at Roman cities, they looked at Greek cities, and they thought about like, what are the secrets here? What are the proportions? What do we need to do to make sure that it's beautiful? Because we want our citizens to live in an elevated city. We want them to feel beautiful. We want them to feel an attachment to this community. So much to the point, like, if a city was beautiful enough, people would lay down their lives to defend it. Like, I wouldn't pick up arms to fight a Girl Scout troop in Lima these days, because it's not worth defending anymore. Yet, their cities were so beautiful. Our cities used to be so beautiful that we cared for them, that we loved them, that they made us proud just to be surrounded. Like, think about this. I believe that when we travel to places, like, we seek out beauty when we travel, not just because we want to view the beauty, because it makes us feel different. It makes us feel more sophisticated to be in a beautiful place. To walk into an elegant restaurant makes us feel different. Like, we seek out these places because of how they make us feel inside. It's like when you eat, that when you eat a cheeseburger, that's going to affect your physical makeup and how you feel. When you look at a McDonald's, it affects how you feel inside. And we need to start paying a lot more attention to how beauty and appearances and aesthetics affect us. And there's a lot of really cool research going into that, but I won't get into that right now. So the beauty made us proud. The community was something that we had that made us so proud. This idea that, like, I live amongst all these people and we look out for one another. We care for one another. We depend on one another. We count on one another. We shop with one another. We help one another out when something goes wrong. I live in this close-knit community, and how proud that must be. Like, we've all had moments where we're proud of somebody else's, maybe kid down the street, or when we're proud of our neighbor, or somebody. Like, during the Winter Olympics a couple months ago, I went to see, like, are any Pittsburghers in the Olympics? Like, I certainly didn't. Well, first off, there wasn't any, but if there were, like, I didn't train them, I didn't know them, I don't have anything to do with them. Yet I would have been really proud of their execution of their performance, just having been associated with them, because we've come from the same place and the same sort of stock, if you will. So this idea of community, the people that we know can make us proud, and that's something that really tied us and attached us to our communities. And these ideas of legacies. So these were my grandparents. This was my mom's mom on the left there with her mom, and then my father's father there on the right with my oldest brother. And something that they were immensely proud of in their community is their ability to create a legacy. They started a business, they owned buildings, they owned homes, and they made an impact in their town. They got involved politically. There was that, back when maybe the chambers were a little bigger, or when the Elks was a bit bigger of a deal, there was more of an ability to feel this sense of ownership, that you could make a difference, that you had a legacy, and you could improve your community, and you could leave something behind, that what you gave your community in the end would improve that place, and that it would be better for having had you in it. So in essence, what we created were these places that we could be immensely proud of, that they gave it, like, we gave a lot, but we got so much in return. We got to live in a place that made us feel elevated, in a place that made us feel connected and supported, in a place where our contributions mattered, and where we were surrounded by beauty, and that just probably filled the residents with this sense of attachment, with a sense of love, but mostly like this sense of pride of, I feel greater sense of self-esteem. I feel elevated for just getting to call this place home and getting to walk around this town. And so, but something bad happened. We made a mistake. And so I go back to that idea of, when a person is dealing with health issues, when a person is down or depressed or apathetic, something occurred. And something certainly occurred in our cities. We made a huge mistake. What we'd had since the advent of civilization, from 7,000, before the Common Era to 1940, were these dense cities, was a local economy where local goods and services. Everything was produced locally and consumed locally. Farmers went to the center of town, they brought their goods and services to market, and they were consumed within that town. It was this incredible closed loop economy where you had what you needed and you needed what you had, because there was not much outside influence. And so that's what we had, these dense communities that were built with pride, with durable materials, because we couldn't afford to build them with disposable materials. We didn't have disposable materials. We had sticks and bricks and stones. So we had to build them with pride. We had to build them to last because we knew it would cost less over the long run. And we built them with pride because we knew then that people would take care of them, and they were more likely to retain their value. We had these incredible cities that, again, were dense and full of pride, and people knew one another and they took care of one another. And I think that they really made people's lives richer. And we thought, like, hey, it could be cool to drive a $50,000 rolling living room across the 20 minutes of traffic to get some milk. We tried this convenience economy. We got it into our heads like, hey, embracing cars is going to make our lives better. It's going to make us free. If we can just drive everywhere, think about all the things that we won't have to deal with. Think about how quick everything will be. Think about how fast. Think about how, just think of how it's just going to, living in the future with the Jetsons, how these cars are going to whisk us out to the countryside, and how we can have so much more of all the things that we like and spend less time doing the things that we don't like. And it's been a colossal mistake. It hasn't worked that well. And during that time, during this period, going back to, about the 40s, where we moved away from kind of these walkable, dense local communities to this convenience community, we've lost a lot of things that really mattered. And and I want to walk through kind of how that was a trauma to itself, and how that shift from the local economy to the convenience, the sprawl economy, has changed us. Standards are something that has changed immensely in our communities during that period, where what was once conceived as unacceptable is now accepted everywhere. It used to be that you would build to a certain standard, that you'd maintain to a certain standard, that you'd even dress to a certain standard. And I think that one of the things that happened is we shifted from a local economy to this convenience economy. There's a lot of pressure from outside to accept, like, a national chain does not want to spend more money in your community. The more that they have to spend on their build out, the more they have to spend on landscaping, the more they have to spend on anything, is less money that they get to give to their shareholders. Their economic interest is figuring out how to spend as little as possible in your community so that they can extract as much as possible. And so that pressure has been building to say, hey, we don't need to do it that nice. What are you, some sort of socialist? Like, you're going to tell us that we have to, hold up some sort of standards? You're going to hold these regulations out there in front of us and tell us that we can't come to your town, et cetera. Like, there's a lot of downward pressure on communities to say, we'll accept less because we want your investment. And we know as standards degrade, things get worse. Nobody has ever lowered their standards as a strategy to improve. No, like, doesn't work in the dating world. Doesn't work with, universities and SAT scores. Like, we have consistently lowered our standards in the name of investment, in the name of economic development. And it's been a real disaster. And I think that it kind of dawned on me the other day that we've grown comfortable with this idea that any investment is a good investment, so we'll take it. And that's like saying that any meal is a healthy meal. It's the act of eating that matters. If I replaced all my hardwood floors with linoleum floors, like, yes, I would be investing. That would be putting money in my house, but that would be putting money in to make it worse. I would be spending money to lose value. And we do that all the time. We see investments all the time in our cities that are making them worse. It's a crazy thing that we do. Our standards have dropped. We've lost the sense of ownership. So little ownership in our communities is now local. A national developer comes in and builds 200 units at a time in a subdivision, and they get to take out that money first before any that so much of that equity could have gone to locals if we still build housing like we used to. The real estate, the commercial buildings, the strip malls, the regular malls, the commerce, the businesses, so much of that ownership that used to be ours has been ceded to outside influences, international chains and national developers. And it's hard to be proud of something. Like, I think about it this way, that in a great plaza or a great square or a great park, we all know that that's the public realm. And the more of those that we have, the more sense of ownership that we feel, the more that relationship is that I better pick up that piece of trash or that cigarette butt because I understand that this community is mine and I have an ownership sense. The more great public realm we have, the richer that collective ownership feels. You don't pick up trash in the Walmart parking lot. You don't take care of it because it's so obviously private. And we've really, beyond just the commerce and the real estate, of the lack of a great public realm has really changed our sense of that's why everybody's like, the city can fix it. Wait for the city to come out and do it, to where we used to say, I'll fix it. This is mine and I own it too. And I'll pick up the trash. Think about how work has changed. Think about think about yourself and in your own life. If you went from having a job that was meaningful and work that made you proud and work that you thought was benefiting your community, to having to go work for somewhere that maybe felt a little more soulless, to work in a place where you knew you weren't making anything better and possibly maybe being on the side of making things worse, and how that changes your own self-esteem. And our communities had to witness that. Our communities had like thousands of people going to work for themselves or for a neighbor or for a community member at a market or a business or something that was, of the city itself, of the community itself, and it was making it better. And having those all wiped out and having the only kind of work left that makes it a little harder to go to sleep at night. We really lost that sense of community, those ties, those social ties. Aren't there nearly to the same degree because we've spread out, because we don't have that great public space anymore, because our homes are further away, because we're in our cars more, because there's less community activities, because we spend less time at the Elks or whatever, all those social ties we've had. That pride that we had in our community has really dwindled in this since we made that shift. And those legacies went away. This was my grandfather's motel. This was a postcard he put out. And there's my mom up there on the putting green. That property where he had his motel, where he had his legacy, that is this today. It sits inside of a clover leaf. There's nothing there. That's wiped out. My other grandfather, he had a food distribution business in Lima. It wasn't in this picture, but it was near that area. That's what that area looks like today. Gone. Like, there's just no sign of anything that he put. There's no sign of that community that's even left. His business is gone. The buildings are gone. His input is gone. His influence was gone. I couldn't, it would have been nice to run one of those businesses when I graduated. And instead I had to go get in debt in college to do Zoom calls. It would have been a lot of fun. It would have been amazing if all of us had these opportunities to assume these businesses that used to be around, and they all got wiped out. And think about that. I think about that is one, both of my grandparents had those businesses. Think about the tens of thousands of legacies that were wiped out, of the businesses, of the savings, of the real estate that were all wiped out when we shifted from this local economy to a sprawl economy. And as much as anything, the beauty went away. This place that used to be, that would lift you up and make you feel sophisticated and elegant to walk down was just went away. It was bulldozed. Not even bulldozed. We had to watch it. We had to watch it fall apart. Imagine watching something beautiful get destroyed. Imagine seeing your own self-decline. Imagine seeing something beautiful get destroyed and how that hurts. Your favorite car, your classic car that you love so much, you wreck it and you can't fix it. Your garden gets trampled, whatever. Think about how it feels to see something beautiful get destroyed. And imagine what it was like for an entire community to watch something beautiful get destroyed over decades, to watch something special fall apart, the trauma that that would inflict and how it would change how people feel, how of course that's going to instill a sense of apathy to see something special fall apart, decline. And like, that's the, you know, that's how nature works. Like things decline, they fall into disorder, but to watch it, to see it, it is going to have some pretty rough impacts. And to kind of delve a little further into this one, and not that this has been the most lighthearted talk so far, but it's going to get a little worse. I think about how beauty and space and our surroundings affect us and what that means, and how we need to pay a lot more attention to our surroundings when it comes to our mental health, and why it matters. And when people say, I went to a former coworker, when I was trying to get this business off the ground. I went back to tending bar, and a guy I worked with, Nick, he came in kind of messed up a couple times and got let go. And, 6 months later, I get a phone call that he had overdosed. And so I went out to the funeral, and afterwards I was walking around his downtown. This is just north of Pittsburgh. And I stumbled upon his main street. This is the main street of the community he lived in. And like, it just kind of ripped me apart. And it's like, wow, this was the center of his town. This is what was held up to be the most important place. And it was gone. It was devoid. It was empty. It was a ghost town. And I thought, is there any surprise that you would look down the street and say, yeah, I bet there's a lot of mental health issues. I bet you there's a lot of depression. I bet you there's a lot of addiction. Like, of course, there's a relationship to what happened to Nick in this community. And I think we can't overlook that, and how much these places matter. Let me show you something real quick.
Much of that research used animal studies, particularly laboratory rats. Rats would be placed in really small cages called Skinner boxes.
A Skinner box is a box which is just about 3 times the size of a rat. The experiments involved putting rats in Skinner boxes with a needle which was implanted in their jugular vein, so that if the rats pressed the little lever on the wall, they would get a little surge of heroin in their bloodstream.
Press the pedal, get a shot of heroin. Press the pedal, get another shot.
And in some cases, they just kept pumping heroin into themselves to the point where they forgot to eat and would die.
Beliefs about rat studies would find their way into PSAs and Hollywood films, and they would become part of our collective understanding of just how dangerous these drugs really were.
These experiments seem to show that any creature, including even the lowly rat, if given access to heroin, would simply take lots and lots of it.
But Bruce had another idea.
What these experiments really show is that rats who are in solitary confinement will take lots of heroin.
See, rats are very social animals. Rats don't normally spend their lives in harnesses with catheters shoved in their necks. They prefer playing with other rats, running around, doing rat stuff.
To put a rat in a Skinner box is to make this very, very social creature live a life of solitary confinement.
Bruce and his colleagues wondered if maybe these rats were taking so many drugs because they were living in such an unnatural environment. So he organized his own rat experiment, but with some important differences. Most notably, he built a much bigger enclosure for them.
About half as big as my garage floor, as a matter of fact.
Bruce and his colleagues filled it with everything a rat could want: food, running wheels, and other rats to play with. He called it Rat Park. His team put a group of rats in the park and another group of rats in solitary cages. They made morphine freely available to both. The results were eye-opening. Giving the choice between plain water and morphine, the Rat Park residents chose the water. It's not like the rats in Rat Park totally abstained from morphine, but
you could say that they acted more or less like human recreational users of morphine.
Bruce and his colleagues even tried an experiment where the rats in cages were giving nothing but morphine-laced water to drink for 57 days straight.
In other words, we made sure they were good and addicted. In terms of the conventional expectation, every one of those rats should have been addicted for the rest of its life.
But when they were placed in Rat Park, those same addicted rats generally chose to drink the plain water and voluntarily went through withdrawal.
People were shocked that the rats in Rat Park had so little interest in morphine.
The Rat Park study suggested a much more complex picture of addiction than many people had suspected. Addiction wasn't simply a story of chemicals rewiring our brains or hijacking our reward centers. Other factors like environment, feeling of isolation or hopelessness, poor social bonds, and lack of control all likely play an important role in what leads to addiction.
Yeah, that blows my mind. But it makes so much sense. You think that we have all these assumptions about how addiction works and depression, et cetera, and it's like, well, no, so much of that is related to your surroundings, to your ability to be engaged, to create ability to bond with other people and feel a sense of belonging and the sense of community, and to be surrounded by beauty and to be in these great places. And it's kind of and that's how everybody thought about addiction. And turns out, like, actually, no, it's the best way I've heard it put is, it's like we all are seeking to bond with something. And if there's nothing beneficial to bond with, we'll seek out non-beneficial things. Like if we can bond, if it's relationships that we have, then there's less need for substance abuse, and those bonds tie us to something. It's something rewarding and positive that we bond with, and with the lack of something rewarding and positive to bond with, we'll seek out negative things to fill that void. And so how much our place plays in that, like, of course, these issues have been exacerbated in as our places have completely transformed, as it's harder to connect with people, as there's less a sense of community, as there's less beautiful places to go, as there's less a sense of ownership and something to be proud of, as all of these things have sort of declined. It's been a trauma. Like, it's been a civic trauma for a whole city at one time, which means it's been a trauma for thousands and thousands of people at one time. Of course, going through this is going to lead to apathy. Of course, transitioning, to watch the city fall apart, to lose ownership, like to lose those connections and those relationships that we've all lost, to see it change, to see something go from beautiful to ugly, to go from having a rich social life to not having much, to feeling isolated, to go from having a sense of ownership to having somebody, coming home and having somebody tell you, like, this house is mine now. You don't own it, and you don't even have much say here. You're living under my rules. Like, we all went through that over the course of a couple generations. We all, I think, suffered this sort of collective trauma that's led our cities to be apathetic. It is completely understandable and the most reasonable thing, response to that situation. And sorry, let me replace that. And like, so this was my grandparents' Lama. This was what the place that shaped them. This is what they had and what they would have known. And this would have been the backdrop to their lives, their everyday experiences. Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage. Like, this was where they got to carry out their play. Or Churchill famously, we shape our buildings thereafter they shape us. Like, we shape our places and thereafter they shape us. And this was mine. This was the Lima I grew up in. This was my town. This was the center of my community. This is the place that shaped me and my generation, and continues to shape the generations that live in this. This is what, like, we traded in something that was incredible for this garbage. And you don't think that that's going to have an effect? Like, you don't think that screams apathy and depression and loneliness and addiction? Like, there's nothing good there. There's no local ownership. There's no beauty. There's no pride. There's no community. There's nothing. There's none of the things that we need to feel good in this place. And I think that probably has changed. So I don't believe that people have changed at all. I don't think that we're any different from our grandparents. I don't think that, 20, 50 generations ago, I don't think that our values are different. I don't think that we still want to feel a sense of pride. We still want to feel connected. We still want to see a sense of community. We still want to be safe. We still want to be happy. Like, all those things around the world of every different culture, creed, ethnicity, religion, all people value the same thing. And we value the same thing. We're the same sort of people. We are inherently the same as people that came generations before us. It's our places that have changed so dramatically. Our settings, our surroundings, like, our cages are so different. We went from having Rat Park to having those little isolated cages. So of course we're responding differently. We're behaving different because we as humans just adapt. we adapt to our surroundings. And if those surroundings are beautiful, like we're going to adapt. If our surroundings are substandard, we also adapt. And so what we're dealing with, I think, in so much of our society right now is adapting to poor surroundings. That's why everybody dresses comfortable all the time. I think it has a relationship to, like, you can't wear a suit here. Of course, athleisure is what you wear here. I think it's had a huge hand in our declining politics in this, where we're more polarized. I think it's had a huge hand in so many of our societal problems, that we're not as kind to one another anymore, and that we don't take responsibility as much anymore. Like, that's not just because people upped and decided, like, let's just be irresponsible or mean or cool. Like, this is the adaptation to these surroundings. We've created the situation, and now we're dealing with the repercussions of making this the environment in which we live in. So how can we heal? Moving into a little bit lighter side. So yeah, I think that we've got to heal that. Like, our cities went through this collective trauma, our communities did, which meant all the people did. And we keep trying to apply these lessons of, like, well, let's plan, let's spend, let's fix this, let's fix that. And I don't think that that's the right approach. I don't think that that's the way. Like, if somebody is suffering from severe depression, our approach to help them is different. Like, if you can't get out of bed, maybe you lost your job and that's what put you in a downward spiral. If you can't get out of bed saying, well, I've got a new job for you, that's not going to help. We've got to do something more basic. If you've stopped taking any care of yourself and are wildly overweight, like, telling you, hey, here's how to do a marathon, that's not going to help you. We keep trying to say, like, here's this external fix, I know what you need to do. Yes, you need to go to the gym, but if you can't get out of bed, that's not going to fix. Like, our cities are struggling with the basic. I think so many of our residents went through this trauma, so our community went through this trauma, and it's really struggling just to do the basics. That's why we're having a tough time achieving things. So I think that we have to take a different approach. I think we have to start to look internally. I think we have to build our self-esteem back up. We have to fight this apathy by having little victories. We have to reinstill a sense of pride. And I think it looks like relentless incremental improvement. I think it might look more like getting better 1% every day. It's not going to be a civic center or arena that's going to do it. And all these huge silver bullet projects don't do a damn thing, because they don't fix that smaller or much bigger internal problem. Is we have to start to believe in ourselves again. And I think that if we can look at our work more as community counselors, you and your community are more of a counselor, or maybe you're a personal trainer. Yeah, you might know the technical aspects of what it needs to be done to improve your city, but what we have to do first is start to restore that sense of self-esteem and build our ego up a little bit, and have these small little victories that make us feel a little bit more proud, a little bit more able to get off the couch, improve a little bit every day, so that maybe someday we can do the 5K, or that we can show up to the new job, or that we can get back out there in the dating world. Like, for some communities it might be hard to hear, but I think that there's a lot that's wrong that's keeping us from progressing, and we just need to build up back that internal self-esteem to get better, so that we can follow those plans, so that we can do the technical stuff. So how do we do that? So do this work, through this work, I started to realize, like, as I kind of that this became my focus of, we're dealing with a different problem, this internal problem of apathy, and visiting communities and doing some of these speaking engagements and really starting to think through this. I started to realize, like, yeah, the way into the ditch isn't the way back out. We've got to fix this internally. We've got to start to make communities believe in themselves again. And how does that work? And I kind of come up with these 5 ways that I think that if we focus, we can start to rebuild that sense of pride: identity, standards, ownership, communityness, and appearances. And we will walk through these. And I think that if we can start to think about our communities in this way, we can start to do that internal stuff. We can start to build back that self-esteem. That's going to be the solution. That's going to give our communities the conviction and courage to go out and do the big stuff. Identity is a big one, like who we are. who we are. Like we are really, our self-esteem, our pride is wrapped up in our own self-image and our identity. In that can be traditions, that can be sports teams, are good at this. They've got a brand and a logo and color, like it's easy to support them because you know how. Here's a community in Ohio that this was a mural that recognized their agricultural past and their agricultural identity. So like these are some of the ways that we can start, I think, to build back our pride through our sense of identity. Traditions are fantastic method. This is Bar Harbor, Maine, where they have the annual bridge dinner. Like, what a great tradition. I don't think it's a fundraiser. I think it's just hey, we'd like to get together. Like, oh my God, that must make you feel so proud and rooted in your community to sit with everybody on this bridge. And how that's going to deepen those roots and those bonds are going to grow more entangled and so much richer. The Amish do these barn raisings, like they're breaking a sweat and building a whole barn in one day for one person, or for, I don't know if it's just for one person, but there's this cool tradition that's got to make them feel more a part of their community, more special and deepen those roots. Dingus Day. This might not be so popular in your part of the country, but here where we have, in Buffalo and Pittsburgh, where there's more Polish residents or immigrants, there's things like Dingus Day that we celebrate. God forbid, like here's, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, took this weird, creepy Mothman thing that they had happen there, and they turned it into a festival. They took the negative and turned it into a positive, and are trying to celebrate this as a way to help spin people's perceptions and those attachments. This is a firm out of Texas, does this Civic brand. They do a lot of community-wide branding and help establish the sense like, hey, look, we've got this collective identity. And if we can market that and sell that together, we're all going to do better. I love this company, Steel City, here in town. It's not about sports. They are trying to sell pride in the city. And they do, so I get a bunch of their gear because I'm more proud of my city than I am our sports team. So it can be a big deal in terms of identity, is giving people a chance to have apparel. Branding, is a huge one, and a quality brand. Like, please, God, don't anybody do any more like community branding contests. Like, it's not good enough. Like, it's a nice idea, but at the end of the day, your brand needs to be of such quality that it makes people feel better to have that as their banner. And so these are some great examples of great brands that help deepen that sense of identity. More murals. This is great. So this is in Pittsburgh, and here's a mural downtown that simultaneously is a bit of fun, but it's also celebrating who we are as Pittsburghers. Andy Warhol and Andrew Carnegie are from here, and so two of our most famous residents. Like that, it deepens my tie to here and makes me more proud of my community by reminding me of these other great people that are from here, and so how much that can matter. And history, obviously, like, I'm a preservationist. Like, the more we preserve our past, the easier it is to recognize. And so celebrating local history, letting people know who came before, who built this town, who are the special people from here, is a huge part of that. There's a tradition I started back in my town in Lancaster that I felt like we needed something, a small victory. We needed something to deepen those bonds. And so started a little Thanksgiving morning hike. We'd hike up. It's an Ohio mountain, but it's still, we're going to call it a mountain because that's what it's called. So we'd hike up Mount Pleasant on Thanksgiving morning, and there wasn't a purpose. It wasn't a fundraiser. It was just a thing. And it started with 10 of us hiking up to the top of the mountain, having some coffee and hanging out. And it grows and grows every year. And now hundreds of people will hike up and just look over the town on Thanksgiving morning. And it literally, like the last time I did it, it brought tears to my eyes because it just made me feel such a bigger part of the community. It made me feel part of something, and how incredible that can be. Standards are an area where we really have to improve to start to rebuild that sense of civic pride. And that, that's the same for an individual. Like when we raise our standards, we do better, we feel better about ourselves. And we also give people the opportunity to excel. The problem with always lowering our standards is you're giving people permission to do worse. Well, what if we ask them to do better? When we have, that's when we get progress, is when we're pushed to do better. we feel better. So how can we start to raise standards? We should look at what standards we had for our buildings before and try to adopt them. Like, we used to build in a beautiful manner. We used to have beautiful storefronts. Like, how can we get back to having these higher standards? One of those ways, I'm a big believer in vacant property ordinances and building code enforcement. Like, it's okay to ask people to do better. And the people that don't want to do better, like, it's okay to ask them to leave. We don't have, the whole community doesn't have to cater to a couple of people that don't want to do better. And that's what we've been doing. And that's not good enough. I always come back to this one when it talk about standards. I talk with a lot of mayors and all the time. It's like, hey, you know what we need to do to encourage development and investment? Like, let's just get rid of all our standards. Let's get rid of all code enforcement and design standards. Then everybody's going to flock to town. They're going to love it. And it just has never worked. And it never will. Because it's not low standards we're seeking. It's not a lack of paperwork that we're seeking as individuals. And in the case of investors, they're seeking a lack of risk. No standards equal very, very, very high risk. Investors aren't seeking very high risk. The better the red tape is, the better the regulations are. Not just saying more, but the better. That helps mitigate risk. So raising standards can really help improve investment. Like, Harvard isn't having a problem with applications. They've got incredibly high standards, but people still gravitate towards there. Another example of standards, I love Paris started doing this just at the beginning of the year. The mayor came out and said, like, no, it's not going to be acceptable here for one car to wake up 100 families. We are going to do control the noise pollution. So they are setting a higher standard for noise pollution. They want to keep the city quiet. Signage standards can make a huge deal for how the appearance of a place, and it can help businesses. Things like dog poop and trash. I love this campaign. This is in the Juniata River Valley. Like, they would go and put signs on houses and businesses, like, hey, we noticed it's cuter, it's nicer, thank you, really appreciate it. Like, that's another nudge to try and lift standards. We need to lift standards in terms of our board roles and committee roles and commitments. Like, we need to ask more and hold people accountable for doing more. We need to say, look, this is what we expect, and if you don't live up to it, you have to go. Then it gives these organizations such a better chance to succeed, and it's going to make your service much better. Like, give board members the chance to have a meaningful experience. Give them a chance to be rewarded by making an impact. You can have standards. Once again, comes back to design. Like, you can tell somebody how to build it, and they still, like, if you tell a company, what is it? Home Depot on average extracts $9 million per franchise per city. Like, if you tell Home Depot, like, you have to spend $100,000 on landscaping, pretty sure they're still going to show up. They're, at the end of the day, they're still going to pull a lot of money out your town. We can have high standards. One of my favorite examples of something that happened in the last year. We had one of these talks in Hattiesburg last spring, and about design standards in the buildings, and a new project was proposed in their downtown, a $40 million real estate development. And I got CC'd in on an email chain where the design review committee was like, no, like, we want a big investment like that, but we're not going to do it at the cost of our own self-esteem. We're not going to do it at the cost of ourselves. You have to come back with a better design. And they did. And it was pretty awesome to see. Ownership and engagement is another area to start building up that civic self-esteem and civic pride. When we start to feel like we have that sense of responsibility. Like I said, I didn't wash my rental car that I had yesterday. It was a sweet white minivan, because I didn't own it. It doesn't matter to me. We have got to figure out how to help that. So having better public realm, having better public space, creating those places where people feel like they are in a place that they collectively own is really critical to this. Love it. The mayor over in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania is doing litter and libations. Like, hey guys, come out, clean with me on Saturday mornings, and then we'll drink a bunch of beer and hang out. It does so many awesome things at once. And it also has this IKEA effect that they call, like, there's this thing known as the IKEA effect, that when you assemble that in furniture, you impart something upon yourself with it. You've put some labor and effort into it. Your time and effort went into that chair that you're going to sit in. You're going to have a greater attachment to it because of that. When you clean your community, when you put work into your own community, you start to feel a greater sense of connection to it. Plus, I think it's also good to remember, like, even the most incremental of improvement is still an improvement. Like, you don't have to fix everything in your house. If you just make something a little bit better, you don't have to, you can't get all in shape at once, but if you go to the gym once, you're on the path, you did something, you're getting a little bit better, you're getting incrementally mentally better, and that lifts you up. Another way of improving this sense of local ownership is, art. This is art from some local students. Like, now the students have a piece. They own, in essence, a piece of this downtown, and it's going to make them feel more connected when they see it. More students doing the banners. Again, this is how you foster that sense. Like, we used to know that our communities are ours, and then they went away, and now we need these reminders that, hey, this is still yours. We still get to say what it looks like. We still have some, we can still contribute. In Monaca, Pennsylvania, the new mayor came in and started doing Wine About It Wednesdays. Show up and complain. Tell me what's wrong. Like, that means so much as a citizen to know that somebody might care what I think, to hear somebody might care what I have to say. And it's going to hear me out, because most of us never have that chance to feel that anyone cares what we have to say. That improves a sense of ownership. I'm a big believer where we really need to focus is this idea of real estate development. And I'm a huge fan of the Incremental Development Alliance. They simultaneously teach locals how to become developers and teach municipalities how to cultivate local developers, how to change up your code, how to change up the regs and zoning and things so that we can have local development again. Like, we're not going to fix this problem as long as most of our communities are owned by outsiders. We have to rebuild locally. And IDA does a huge bit of that work. Our cities were built by a swarm of local developers. Think about all the great buildings and all the great houses. Like, those were all local developers. Think about how much wealth then we retained in our communities. And we have to get back to this idea of fostering local development. Sense of ownership is such a big piece. My sister tells the story that they were up in her community in New York. They were having the Strawberry Festival. Tree fell down in the road. And so before you knew it, a handful of guys went and grabbed their chainsaw shovels. I don't know. They didn't grab those. They grabbed their chainsaws, cut it all up, hauled it away. They didn't wait for Monday morning for the city to come out, because they have that sense of ownership in the community. They took care of it. Next, community-ness, this idea of belonging, this idea of being a part of a town, that we are, that our relationship to our town and all those people that are in it exists. And we've got to really cultivate that. Like, community doesn't exist it's not simply a concept. Like, it actually only exists in physical space. We have to have places to gather. A community doesn't exist online. It doesn't exist in traffic. Where community exists in quality public space, that's where we get the chance to feel a sense of togetherness. This slide blows my mind. Here's three, the lines are like social interaction. These are people moving from one building to another. These are people moving around a block. I think this is San Francisco. And so over on the red, that's a street with heavy traffic. So with more traffic, there's less social interaction, less kids moving from house to house or from park to house or this to that, like less neighbors having dinner together. And as you move over to the right to a street where there's light traffic, look how much more interaction there is. That is literally the fabric of community. Those face-to-face greetings, people moving back and forth, passing one another in the street, going to have dinner at one another's house, having front porch drinks, kids playing in the park. That's a fabric. And the tighter it gets, the harder it is to pull apart, the harder it is to fall through, the closer and stronger our community becomes. This was my wedding reception. My wife and I wanted to have a block party, and my neighborhood makes it really easy to have a block party. It's $25. You go online and fill out an application, and next thing you know, the city shows up and puts up the barricades. An instant party. Every time there's a block party, my house becomes worth more to me because I gain more friends. When I drink beer with my neighbors and people on my street, my house becomes worth more. My community becomes worth more to me. I become more attached in it because all we want is friends. We all want more relationships. We all feel stronger and more supported with more people that we know. Plus, it's a super cheap way to have a wedding reception. Block parties, food truck, potluck parties and dinners, food truck parties, front porch concerts. Down in South Carolina, there's a neighborhood where they do Front Yard Friday 5:30, and whoever has the sign that week, they put it out and everybody shows up and drinks in their front yard. Easy as could be, cheap as can be, building community, getting people out of Netflix, getting people off of scrolling and having real face-to-face community. Book clubs are great for that. In New Jersey, during the pandemic, people started putting bars in their garages because they didn't have anywhere to socialize. Another great, easy way to start to build that rich sense of community, to start to tie people together. Because at the end of the day, it's our ties to our community that matter. More so than anything, it's the people that we love, and it's the people that we will defend. It's the people that we'll get involved for. Repair parties. Here's epic skill swap. These are different ideas to get people together to start building that sense of community. Bloomsbury Glitter and Libations, another great one. I started a kickball league in my old town, and 200 people came out and got to know each other, and that built a huge sense of community. And literally, like, the change was profound. I can't even explain it, but as 200 people started to become friends, all these other things started to take place, and people started to think it like it was more people started going to council, more people started to get politically involved, because now the town wasn't just where they had their home, it's where they had their life, it's where they had their friendships, it's where they had a sense of community. Turns out in the end, because of that kickball league, we were able to save this building, this 30,000 square foot building that council wanted to tear down. I called in the kickball league and asked them if they would come stand in front of it, and they did, and council couldn't tear it down, and that building has been renovated to the tune of about $5 million, and it's led to so much more. All right, getting in the home stretch finally. Appearances matter so much. They shape the way we think of things. Like, we navigate this world by appearances, and it is okay to accept that. Like, one of the dumbest cliches I think that we ever embrace is never judge a book by its cover. There's a lot of money spent on book covers. There's a reason why they're designed. Tell me this, which Scarlet Letter would you rather read? If you saw one on the shelf, I can tell you which one I would completely ignore and never want to read, and the other like might intrigue me. Book covers matter. We are going to base what's inside the character of the content based on external appearances. That's how we have to navigate the world as humans. Look, if I got in a little bit of trouble and I had to hire an attorney, like, this might be a terrible thing to say, but I know which person I'm going to gravitate towards. I know which person I'm going to feel more comfortable having handle my freedom. And it's like, maybe I don't know their character, but I can tell you that one person decided that their appearance was going to be one way. This was their decision on how they wanted the outside world to measure them, on how they wanted to be perceived by the outside world. And that says something to me about what that person means and what they're about. And that's okay. Again, it's their decision. And it's okay to look at somebody's decision. Like, I get it. Like, I understand in these two pictures, there might be very different economic circumstances, yet we look at that house and make judgments. That's how we have to operate as humans. And that's understandable. And we need to take that to heart and realize appearances do matter. And that we automatically judge things based on appearances, and how much we have to think about that. And it's not just external appearances. Look, going back, like, it's one thing. Yes, people are going to come back past that house and think something about you. What if you have to walk in the front door of one of those houses? It's going to change how you feel about yourself. Appearances matter, and it matters on a civic level. If one town is yours and the other town is yours, I mean, it's not the worst example down there, but you're going to feel differently about your community, but more so you're going to feel differently about yourself, depending on which town you pull into, depending on which town you do your shopping, which town you have your job in. Like, it changes how we feel about ourselves. Appearances matter externally and internally. Here's a great way to improve appearances. And it's even the little things. It's flowers, it's bike lanes, it's crosswalks, like little improvements to appearances. We've all made little changes in our home that have changed how we feel about it, that make us like it more. A haircut can make you feel better about yourself. A new dress can lift you up. Like, appearances matter, and they make us feel better. And this is the type of community counseling stuff that we need to do, is make those little incremental improvements relentlessly, so we start to feel better about ourselves as a community. So we start to feel proud. So we start to feel that sense of self-esteem. I love these. This is like my new favorite thing to look up, is examples of when we've gotten rid of bad urbanism and replaced it with good urbanism, when we've taken something ugly and replaced it with something beautiful, and how much different that makes. So there's an example in New York. Here's an example in Paris, I believe, or no, maybe that's New Orleans. I can't, but this is one of my favorites of all time. And I think this is about where we wrap up. This is Nijmegen, Netherlands. And apparently, I don't know if this is true, but I've read that they have a vote every year. They vote on the ugliest building and then they tear that shit down and replace it with a pretty building. Like, talk about getting better. Replacing something ugly with something beautiful, and how great that must make the community feel to see progress constantly happening, and that incremental progress to know, look, every year we're getting better. So yeah, so what I would suggest, timing, impeccable. I like to something that I coach communities to do, I recommend, is a civic pride campaign. Take these ideas and implement them. Like it's nobody, like, stop making everybody get on committees. Start to think about campaigns, and look, there's a start date to an end date, or start thinking about projects. What can we do, in a more discrete, more finite, like, here's when it starts, here's when it ends, here's, it's only one thing I want you to do. But think about if you can create a campaign around these ideas of how do we improve our standards? Can you get some legislation passed? How do we strengthen our identity? Can you, highlight some of the great people that came before? How do we improve appearances? Like, man, the pick up litter. Like, there's so many things that we can do, and small, easy things that we can begin to do that are this relentless incremental improvements. It's going to get us a little bit better every day. Parties, block parties, like, just the little things are going to start to make it better. That's going to build that civic self-esteem. That's going to be those little victories that start to make us proud. And a trajectory, like, we're just talking about trajectories here, guys. Like, a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of improvement is all it takes to shift a trajectory from down to up. And sometimes that's all we need, is to start moving on a right path, to have a few little victories so we can start to have the bigger ones. But it all comes down in the end to action. In the end of the day, we've just got to do it. We can't keep asking everybody what they want. We can't keep looking at plans. We can't keep doing studies. Like, we know what needs to happen. There's no mystery at all. We know what people want to see. They want cute little downtowns. They want pretty, like, this myth that in small towns somehow that all of a sudden people don't like nice things. It's the biggest bunch of bullshit. Like, everyone likes nice things. Everyone likes pretty places. Everyone likes a sense of ownership. We all want a beautiful civic realm. We all want to be proud of our towns. We don't have to keep coming back and asking people what they want. We just need to take action. We just need to get going and start doing. We need to start taking this relentless incremental improvement and get a little bit better every single day, because over the course of time, that's going to add up to so much, and that's going to lead to real change. That's going to lead to real pride, real sense of ownership, and that's going to fix this problem that's really been plaguing our communities. And thank you. Is anyone still there on the other end?
I think so, Jeff. That was
Thank
great.
God. That would have been horrible to find out, like, 10 minutes into it, it had crashed. And
No. Well done. This is great stuff. Again, I'll remind people this is being recorded, and we'll also get a copy of Jeff's slides. We'll post those out under the Inland Northwest Partners website under the resource tab. Jeff, I really like this idea of the relentless incremental improvements, and it's really that's not hard to do. I mean, it's not like you have to raise $1 million before you can go, right?
Right, just the opposite. I mean, that's often the problem, is when we make it too big, when it's like, oh, only thing. I mean, Jamestown, New York, with a poverty rate of 30%, built a $50 million comedy museum, and it didn't make anything better. I think that's the problem we run into, is thinking it's only these huge things are going to make it any better. And it's like, no, getting better means small. Like, it means little improvements over time.
Great. Yeah, questions for Jeff. Put those in the Q&A box, and we'll tee those up for him to answer. So again, Jeff, some great examples and cases around the country. I think you've given people a little, just a little sense of what it takes. Again, in Eastern Washington, North Idaho, the communities that we serve as a utility, as you said, every community has a personality, and you've got to figure it out, and you've got to You've got to celebrate it and really work with that. I know I love following your blogs, and I would encourage all of us on the call today to follow the blog, Just Revitalize Our Day blog. But question here, Jeff, how aggressive were your timelines for different projects? So again, how aggressive on timelines for these kinds of projects?
Yeah, when it comes to improvement, I mean, I think that when it comes to small incremental, like immediately, I mean, there's no reason to delay. There's no reason that you can't do something every single day to get better. And that, that might just be picking up a piece of trash. It might just be having people over tonight instead of turning on Netflix. It might just be inviting a neighbor over to hang out on the front porch. Like, I don't think that there's this sort of stuff is so small. That's where I think that's the simplicity of it, is that it doesn't take much to get started. You know, you don't have to run a marathon to get in better shape. But you can walk around the block. And I think that that's the key to it. It's not making this so complicated that no one ever starts. You don't need a committee to pull weeds.
Yeah. This question, Jeff, says, our community is having serious volunteer burnout. It seems like these groups are well-meaning, but too much gets put on too few group members. Is there a way to combat this?
I think that this is kind of where I lean on like my behavioral economics background, that what we think that we want to do volunteers is to not burden them. So it's like, hey, we want you to volunteer and we're going to make it nice and easy. Meet with this committee. And you guys can discuss things and maybe come up with a plan. Like, if you sit me in a room to talk about parking for 5 straight months, I will definitely not be involved. That I think when people say burnout, sometimes it's being overworked. A lot of the times it's a way to say, like, I'm just not enjoying this. Like, this isn't working for me. And so I think that it fits really well with the overall picture. It's like, don't ask volunteers, if you come to me and say, hey, will you sit on my design committee and maybe you'll work on signage, or maybe you'll work on a vacant property ordinance, or maybe you'll work on a brand, and I don't know how long it's going to take. And like, no, that is a mess. But if you come to me and say, hey, will you go and pick up trash on Saturday mornings? Like, 100%. Will you dig a ditch? Will you do this thing? Will you, like, I think we need to take a little more ownership over the projects that we want to implement and say, here's what needs done. Here's a start date and an end date. Like, everybody always has an easy time getting volunteers for events. Hey, look, the parade, it starts, at noon and it's done by 2. Okay, I can do that. We need to get better about having these very finite projects and ask people to get project oriented. It's easier to find the right people. If it's a vacant property ordinance, I might know 5 people in the community that would work on that, and I can tell you about how long it's going to take. So if we do a better job of matching volunteer, and again, like, if my volunteer experience is breaking a sweat for a few hours and making something nicer, I'm going to love that volunteer experience. It's going to make me happy, and I'm going to be thankful for the organization that allowed me to do it. But if it's sitting in a meeting and listening to your reports for a matter of months, like, I'm going to be very unhappy.
Yeah, I like that idea, that strategy of libations and litter cleanup. So it seems like libations are pretty effective leveraging tool, right?
And it's a great point. Like, man, make it fun. Like, this doesn't have to be misery. Like, stop beating people up, and no more Robert's Rules of Orders. And if you have to have a meeting, please don't do it in the chamber room. Like, have beer and pizza and like go fun places. Like, this is fun work and it's important and it matters, but it should be fun, and lighten the hell up. Like, let's make this stuff fun so people don't avoid us when we're walking down the street. The more fun it is, the more people are going to want to come out and get involved. So yeah, beer at everything.
Question, how would you suggest getting your elected officials in a community to understand these concepts and get them to buy in?
A big part is meeting with them. I mean, really, like, there's always this assumption nearly every time I work, and it's like, council says, well, the community doesn't care, or they don't speak up, or we don't know what they want. And then the whole community is like, council doesn't care, they're not listening. It's like, well, both can't be true. So I really think that there's a lack of communication. Going back to HUMA 2 weeks ago, I'd ask the question, who here thinks that vacant property legislation is appropriate? Like 70 people raised their hand. Everybody agreed that the city should pass vacant property legislation. I turned to the city councilwoman and said, would you do this? She said, yeah, of course. But the problem is none of these people are going to be at that meeting, and the 5 deadbeat property owners will. So it's like, it might be that you don't know what council wants. You're seeing the lack of progress and making assumptions that maybe aren't true. Find out, meet with council, meet with the mayors, meet with the city manager, and try to understand their motivation. Try to understand, like, people are rational. Somebody's behaving or what you think is irrationally. It's time that we get to the bottom of it, find out what's motivating them, why they're doing what they are, and how to motivate them differently. Because at the end of the day, like, no mayor wants to tank their city. They think that what they're doing is good. No council person wants to trash their town. What they think they're doing is good. So it's a matter of communication and understanding something is motivating them, something that they don't understand, that if you could help them understand, maybe everybody could win, because we all want what's best for our community.
Yeah. So 2 questions, excuse me, kind of related, Jeff. This person says, we have a lot of buildings owned by one person. Most are vacant and not cared for, but the city is hesitant to craft regulations. Any resources or ideas? And then another question, I hear all the time, cities are hesitant to craft regulations for vacant buildings. I'm curious why. What's your experience been?
I think that in the recent years, we've really had this whole property rights argument turned on its head in a very maybe calculated but misleading way. And the idea behind property rights when the legislation was established was your property values have to be protected if you've invested in a home or a building, to ensure that somebody else will one day invest. We've got to protect your property values, which means there has to be some controls on what happens nearby. Well, that's been kind of bastardized and turned into, I can do whatever I want with my property. You won't tell me. Like, no, that's exactly wrong. Like, it does not give you a right to let your building fall apart. Property rights doesn't give you a right to put storage. Like, it wasn't an excuse to lower standards, quite the opposite. So I think that we have to really understand that, like, the property rights argument needs to be about property values. And so the best way I think to approach that in any community is try to get a highly vested owner in at the front end of this. So before you announce it and everybody, goes crazy about property rights, sit down with an owner of a building that has invested millions, that's and get them to understand it and say, hey, look, you're being harmed. Your property rights are the ones that are being risked. Like, we're telling everybody else not to take care of their buildings. We're telling everybody else, please don't invest in our community because we don't give a shit about, anything goes here. We don't, like, if you got rid of all speed limits, what would you expect? People would speed. Like, if you get rid of all, design regulations, you're going to have this problem where nobody really takes care of them. You're giving people permission not to care. And another way I saw it done. So one is using a really good property owner to take the lead, to make the case, like, look, hey, I put my money in. Another great way I saw it done in Sandusky, Ohio, was the fire department. Main Street program sat down with the fire chief. They walked through this, explained what they were trying to do. The fire chief was like, of course, this is huge for me. It's like, I don't like sending my people into these vacant buildings. Like, that's the most dangerous thing that we can do, especially when these are party walls. One building, one fire could bring down a whole block. So the fire chief in Sandusky went in front of council and said, hey, look, this isn't okay anymore. Like, we need to have a way to pay to get inside. And, like, we need to in essence, assess all these buildings, but the cost shouldn't be burdened by the community at large. So the legislation is written, shifting the cost burden of vacant property from the general citizenry to the owner itself. So the fire department said, hey, they need to pay for it. They signed this vacant property registry. And now the fire department goes through, health code officials, building department officials go through, and it costs $400 per owner, and it doubles every year. And in essence, it's just a big pain in the ass. And the fire chief told me in Sandusky, it dropped by 60%. Vacant property dropped by 60% in the first year because of that program. So I think it's really, like, it's great. Of course, dealing with vacant property is great, but the politics, I think, are what get in the way. if you can use a good property owner, or if you can use the fire department to help get it through, I think that that's a great strategy.
Yeah, great. I've always thought property rights, along with property rights comes property responsibilities too. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. So, hey, Jeff, we had a question about, effective social media campaigning around raising awareness, sort of building the civic pride, apathy, or pride, not apathy. And I'm just wondering, have you seen some good examples out there as far as effective? One of the things that we do as the Inland Northwest Partners, we do provide social media training to our communities. So we have a social media expert that will come in and sit down with your community and kind of share what are those best practices and things. But just curious about some of the work you've seen around the country.
My favorite stuff, my favorite is has fortunately become a friend and colleague in recent years, is a guy named Phil Ike out of Saginaw and Bay City, Michigan. And Phil Ike has kind of taken a Humans of New York approach. So Saginaw put out an RFP a couple years ago for marketing and PR, looking at the typical stuff. And Phil approached him. He's like, no, I won't do that. But what I will do is sell your community to the people that already live there. What I will do is try to make the people that are already the 30,000 residents of Saginaw love it. And they took a risk. And Phil does this. He's basically creating a bunch of local celebrities through photography, video, interviews, stories. He is telling the 10,000 fascinating stories of the residents of Saginaw. And it is awesome to watch, just because where all of our communities are full of fascinating people. Every one of us on this call has some sort of interesting background or fascinating story that makes them who they are. And he is just telling that story for the people of Saginaw. So a couple times a week, there's someone new to celebrate in town. And so all of a sudden they're like, hey, our town is full of fascinating, beautiful, amazing little celebrities. And man, it's gone through the roof. I mean, it's had so many other effects. Instead of trying to sell Saginaw to the town a half hour away, they're selling Saginaw to Saginaw, I don't know, Saginwegians or something. And it's getting a ton of hits, and it's encouraging that positivity, and it's making people love their town more. I think that's where it's at.
Great. It's a great suggestion. Other questions? Jeff, keep them coming. Hey, so Jeff, tell me a little bit about your book, Your City is Sick.
So there was, I started it about this time last year, and the idea kind of was that we've got this $3 trillion healthcare industry, and it's gotten really good at treating individuals. But we don't think enough about this municipal health, this idea of where we live and how much that affects our well-being. And so I try to write it with that in mind of how do we start to improve our cities? How do we, if we improve the health of a city, you might improve the health of 30,000 people all at once. And so I got to thinking about what we look at in terms of individual health. It's kind of our physical health, our social health, our mental health, our fiscal health, excuse me, and how that relates to cities. And I thought, yeah, a pretty city where people feel well connected is going to improve the social health of everybody. Great public spaces are going to improve people's social health. Beauty is going to improve your mental health. Not having to own a car might improve your fiscal health. That all these, so much of our well-being is tied up in the places that we call home. An example I always rely on, it's like, look, if I lived in a cul-de-sac, I would likely have less, connection with my neighbors. I wasn't born less neighborly, but if I have an attached garage, no sidewalk, and our houses, each have 5 acres, I'm just not gonna know them as much. And so, that's a product of my own well-being being tied up in where I live. And that's the reason why you go to certain places and you feel so great about, you walk down a certain street and you feel great about yourself. There's Now, I'm a big Anthony Bourdain fan, and he always made the point that, like, rarely the best meals rarely rarely are about the food. It's the setting, it's the company, it's the atmosphere. And it's like, right, the best places it's about so much more. And if we can get the place thing right, I think we can really lift up the lives of individuals and have this. And it's certainly a lot more cost effective.
Great, good. Yeah, it reminds me, you talk about the cul-de-sac. There's a great little store in Palouse, Washington, a shameless plug for a little store called Swale. They have a little sticker in there and it says, practice radical neighboring. And I just think that's so cool. So cool.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so people can't wait for the book. So come on.
I hope I can find somebody to
you a
publish it.
publisher, right?
Any publishers online, please, like, call me. Any literary agents. I don't, this is a completely new world to me, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, we'll try and help you too. We'll try.
Thank you.
So, good. Any other questions for Jeff? I mean, again, just fabulous insights, and just know we've got his presentation recorded, and we'll post his slides. And again, go out to revitalizeordie.com, follow his blog. He's on Facebook, and I think you're on Twitter or maybe Instagram.
Yeah, not very well.
Yeah.
Not very well.
But an incredibly gifted writer. I'm amazed with your writing, Jeff. So
Thank you.
So can't wait for the book. We got to get this book out. So, all right. Anyway, okay. So Jeff, again, on behalf of the Inland Northwest Partners and all of our attendees today, thank you so much for being our presenter. And I want to thank Idaho Central Credit Union for sponsoring our presenter this morning. Thank you, Richard and Jenny and everybody else at ICCU. Remember that we'll post copies of this on the INWP website as well. Next, we're going to have a link come up on the survey to do a survey for our next meeting and kind of a little bit of feedback on today's meeting. Please take a time to do that. Thanks, Mackenzie. We want to make sure we hear from you. And again, we use the evaluation and survey to help us really shape future INP meetings. And again, it's through feedback from all of you that are in the trenches every day doing the great economic and community development work that you all do in your communities. We want to know what's keeping you up at night. Where are those challenges? How can we bring best practices and people like Jeff and others into our community and to help you as well? So I want to thank the Inland or the U of I Extension for the support today as well. And all of our major sponsors and investors, all of you that attended today, thank you again. We will be in person. It's likely we'll be in person in June. We haven't decided on where we'll be, but we'll make sure it will be a great topic, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. So with that, I want to wish you all a happy spring. Jeff, I want to thank you again and just wish you continued success in the work you do. I think hopefully you have a few more fans following you in the days ahead as well. So
I hope so. Thanks for having me, Paul.
All right. Well, with that, thanks everybody. And again, Mackenzie, Colette, thank you so much.